but he grew old. This night so bold, and over his heart a shadow fell as he found no spot of ground that looked like El Dorado.
Hello all, this is the Owl, and before we start with the recap, let's get a few things out of the way. This was going to be my final video in the Made in Abyss series, but after rereading this section and discussing the matter with the lovely Mrs. Owl, I've come to the conclusion that this is going to have to be 2 videos. Not only because the video would be longer than I'd like, at least as long as part 4, and that was a bloody nightmare to render and upload, but because, well, some of the content in this bit is simply so extreme that I want to give people a chance to back out now. And yes, that's with me cutting out some of the more graphic panels. So today's video is going to carry a special warning. I can only imagine that this is going to have to be dialed back substantially in the anime release, much like that one bit in Higurashi, because this section is relentless. One bit in particular made me physically nauseous, and simply describing it made Mrs. Owl cry. So if you're feeling a bit wobbly today, or are of an even slightly sensitive disposition, maybe go and watch some Bob's Burgers or something, and join me again for part 6. I'll give a short summary there to catch you up. Okay, you're all sufficiently warned? Well then, let's get dangerous. Riko, a young novice caver, Reg, an amnesiac android, and Nanachi, a sweet-smelling bunny kangaroo thing, headed down into the depths of the abyss, a subterranean world stretching down seemingly forever. After bypassing archvillain Bondrude and obtaining the white whistle needed to move further down, the trio found themselves on the mysterious 6th layer, the capital of the Unreturned, and after exploring for some time, entered the seemingly sentient village of hollows, Iruburu, or Iblu, which I know is probably going to be the name in the English dub, but it sounds funny to me. While initially fascinated, the trio quickly discovered that Iruburu was even more dangerous than Layer 5. Its entire morality system is derived from the nebulous idea of value, and nearly everything in Iruburu can be bought or sold, including flesh and people. Damaging something of value brings down the balancing on you, a Shoggoth creature who takes away everything you own, including your flesh and organs, until this debt is repaid. Secondly, the villagers range from friendly to ominous to outright hostile. After arriving, Nanachi quickly goes missing, and it's discovered that she sold herself to the sinister the Corinthian, Belaf, who, for some reason, possesses a clone of Nanachi's dead friend Mitty. After freeing the mysterious Fueko, Riko helps save the village from an attacking monster, earning her the help of Wazukyan, another big village muckety-muck, who suggests that they could maybe get back Nanachi by purchasing her with a piece of Faputa, the immortal and super powerful princess of the Hollows in exile, who apparently has some sort of connection with the amnesiac Reg, as well as a serious case of the horny bugs for him. We also learn that Fueko was one of the 3 original founders of the village, as well as Wazukyan and Belaf, but due to something terrible that happened in the past, She was imprisoned in the depths of Iruburu and was replaced by this dude, Judo Imo. Reg agrees to speak with Faputa, despite his wariness over the ridiculously powerful nudist tarantula cubey thing that seems to constantly want to jump his robot bones. And Faputa eagerly agrees to help him as long as he fulfills his long-forgotten promise to her. Without waiting for him to agree or for her to explain, she proceeds to rip off an arm and an ear, jeez, and gives them to Reg, while revealing that the promise involved him helping her to wipe out Iruburu entirely. Yikes. And with that, it's time to get cracking on the penultimate part of this arc. Brace yourselves, because we're in for some chop, and by the end of this, you'll be far from 5x5. Volume 8 opens with a standard, gobsmackingly gorgeous little spread combined with, yeah, Tsukushi, you worry me sometimes. As before, I'm sticking white blobs over anything that could even be slightly considered naughty, and there's rather a lot in this arc that YouTube would get narky over. But note these three people. Yeah, that's Fueko and Belaf as humans. Is it just me, or does Belaf look like Captain Hitsugaya from Bleach? I mean, he's got the forelock and the scar and everything. And another girl who you'll be meeting soon. Oh boy. Also, remember that cute rabbit creature semi-visible at the bottom of the page? Trust me on this. Now, before we get rolling, I want you to keep the setup for the section in mind. As we saw in the last video, all we know going in is that Iruburu's mysterious origins contain a terrible secret, and something that occurred during the founding got Fueko bumped from the sages and replaced by Judo Imo. Now, we get to travel back in time with Fueko narrating the entire thing. We know that something dark is coming, something involving someone called Irum Yui. What it is, we don't know, but this immediately causes us to head in uneasy and anxious. See, Made in Abyss is a masterclass in how to tell a dark story and really grip an audience by the short and curlies. By giving us this much setup and build-up for the dark stuff to come, a mystery is established, and we are now waiting eagerly in anticipation of the horrible revelation ahead. But because it bides its time, sets up mood and characters, the horror and tragedy looming over the horizon has a much greater impact. It's why stuff like Higurashi, Berserk, Gans and the like are so well known and well regarded, and other disturbing manga like Magical Girl Sight, Redo of Healer and Pygmalion are for the most part discarded as silly edgy boy Gorno. Keep this in mind as we move forwards. Whatever his other proclivities, Tsukushi knows how to craft a damn fine story. Right off the bat, we see a vision of the past as a young human Fueko contemplates traveling into the abyss. We learn a bit about her background. She was an orphan, taken in by a horribly abusive dickhead. Oh, and if you're thinking that he maybe resembles a certain taint-faced penis sword-wielding hollow from last time, keep that thought in mind, because it might come into play later. Anyway, Dickhead boasted about a party who told him about a golden city beneath the earth, but also returned either in pieces or stark raving mad. He was left a compass by said maniac, which is very similar to the compass Rico had at the very start of the series. And the compass sparked a fantasy of escape in Fueko. Fueko trained and worked hard in preparation, and eventually she was able to somehow take the compass to a local eccentric adventurer, Wazukian. Yes, that Wazukian, who allowed her to join his expedition to find the Golden City, declaring her one of the three sages of... wait, Ganja? I think I know why Wazukian seems so chill all the time.
It's the ganja, it's the marijuana that's creeping upon me while I'm so high.
Ganja, in this case, refers to their party, which is later implied to basically be a sort of ill-fated expedition, striking out with the expectation of death. But I'm not sure whether Ganja refers to their specific expedition or any expedition of this nature. We also see Vueko speaking with Belaf, who's much more grounded, but for some reason he still admires Wazukyan almost to the point of worship. After a long and difficult journey, they arrived at the entrance to the abyss and headed below. After trading her compass for the assistance of the aggressive natives to the area, the expedition learns that the Golden City, called Shoro, apparently does exist, but the natives warn them that if they enter, they'll never be able to return. Yep, capital of the unreturned. As they enter, they encounter a somewhat feral native girl child, who Belaf explains has been cast out and thrown into the abyss due to her infertility. No, I don't want to ask questions about that. Vueko wants to help the child and bring her along as a guide, but the rest of the group say that she'd be a drain on their supplies. Wazukyan, however, intervenes, and due to his evident, almost paternal affection for Vueko, agrees to let her join them. Which seems noble, but does sort of kick off a chain of tragic events that, yeah, you'll see. Something interesting to note at this point is that this feels very much like an adaptation of the El Dorado myth, a literal city of gold, which actually makes its way into a fair few manga and anime, including this gem that anyone from my country would recall from their childhoods. Yeah, that song is never going to leave my head. Wazukyan's human armor also gives a very Don Quixote feel, so I wonder if Ganja is supposed to be some sort of Spanish suicide squad. Remember when I said this arc reminded me a lot of Skypiea? Well, that's another adaptation of El Dorado. As the group descends, they discover a mysterious poison or illness that befalls anyone that tries to move upwards, establishing that the curse of the abyss is very, very old. Members of the group fall prey to the curse and the various monsters, but eventually find their way down to the altar lift and enter Layer 6, and immediately come face to face with the robotic interference units, who lead them to Shoro, but the expedition is immediately attacked by an absolutely enormous Hydra-like creature. Bloody hell, that art. Yeah, I'm gonna try and gush less this review, but just look at that. And yes, as the party realizes, this El Dorado is actually closer to Relay. Regardless, most of the expedition manages to escape, and after they do, the survivors spend some time talking with the interference units. Now, this is another bit that's a little unclear to me, but it seems like, in their discussion, we learn that Wazukyan has come seeking something a bit more than the Golden City. Apparently, he considers himself a bit of a prophet, and according to myth, there's something about this place that allows you to ascend past your human form, which, if you've been paying attention, you should probably be able to figure out. Yep, Gold Star. He's talking about the blessed forms that can sometimes happen when the curse of the 6th layer mutates you, and from what we know, this requires someone else to basically take on your share of the curse as well as theirs. It's how Nanachi became furry bait, and how Bondrewd became an evil fuzzy lumpkins for a while. However, Wazukyan naturally doesn't know this and can't figure it out. They're faced with a conundrum. They can either stay in the monster-infested city and survive as best they can, or go back and become, as they describe, hollow husks of their former selves. Yep, nararehate or narehate, or hollows, as the curse of the 6th layer kicks their asses. The expedition is unable to find an answer, so they decide to stay. But they do learn that the natives they encountered above were, despite their primitive appearance, a lot more advanced and literate than their society. Belaf approaches Vueko and the native girl, who we learn is called Irumyui, and asks her to help him teach the remaining expedition members their language. There's also a brief exchange which is very interesting. If I'm not mistaken, Irumyui implies that the natives know, or at least had contact with, the original residents of the Golden City. That's something to remember going forwards. We also get a brief scene of, knowing what's coming. This little bit of cute fluff takes on a totally different connotation. Irumyui finds an abyss creature, somewhere between an African tortoise and a rabbit. Let's call it, how about a rabbit-tortoise? And the young exiled girl immediately falls in love with the adorable little critter. Wazukyan wants to cook it for dinner, but Vueko, remembering an awful scene from her childhood where her abusive adoptive father killed her puppy in front of her, stops him. She's sort of become an adoptive mother towards Irumyui, and both Belaf and Wazukyan agree to let the creature live, as a pet and an expeditionary mascot of sorts, with Belaf wanting to study it to find out how better to survive in the city, and Wazukyan, well, because it's cute. We see the first big problem facing the settlers: water. After speaking with the interference units, the expedition learns that there are 5 sources of water in the area. But 2 are home to terrible monsters. 1 is polluted with mineral waste, and 1 is boiling hot. The last one, after investigating, does seem to be potable, so they take it back to camp, and the Ganja settlement is established. Everything is looking, well, not rosy, but at least viable. And yes, I'm sure anyone who's been following the series is hearing the sizzling of a fuse somewhere. Oh, Tsukushi, you absolute bastard. Over time, the settlers learn how to subsist within the abyssal city, hunting, killing, and eating smaller monsters, and drinking water from that supply. However, one day, Vueko notices that Irumyui is sickly. Vueko takes care of her, and Irumyui explains that, presumably the native women are basically baby factories, but Irumyui was found to be infertile, which resulted in her being banished to the abyss as something cursed by it. It's also implied that other very bad stuff happened to Vueko at the hands of her adoptive parent, which also rendered her infertile. But let's leave that at that. Anyway, the 2 bond and grow very close. In a montage, we see Vueko having lesbian sex. Oh, there you are, Tsukushi, you randy old bugger. And also that Irumyui's little pet rabbit tortoise gets eaten by a monster. She's naturally devastated, but to help her mourn, Vueko makes her a necklace out of its bones because, that would help. Later, we see, I think that's the girl she was boinking. And by the hat, that may very well be Mugi. You know, that tavern keeper we saw previously. Oh, thank you so much for that image, brain. She wakes Vueko up, and we see that Irumyui is sick again. This time much worse than before. Feverish, diuretic, and unresponsive. Vueko notices strange larvae in the poo, but her lady friend calls her over, and it turns out that the other children are also sick, with some of them starting to melt and then harden to something that looks like stone, becoming something like old magma. It takes a while, but they eventually figure out that it's the water source they've been using. The water is itself a living creature. Okay. And getting things to drink it is how it hunts. So the expedition will need to find a new water source somehow, because this is eventually going to poison them all. They also find that a group of foragers returned with bizarrely mutated forms and died shortly after. In their possession, get this, is an egg-shaped relic with a potent but disquieting aura that Vueko provides some ominous text over. Yeah, I wonder what this could be a reference to. The interference units are perturbed by the Behelit, saying that spheroid relics have the power to grant wishes, and that this is a crazily powerful and crazily dangerous one. But as the unit explains, it's not as simple as rubbing a lamp and saying, "I want a 10-foot donga, please." The Behelit, yes, I'm calling it that because, come on, instead reads your greatest desire and tries to fulfill it. However, unless this desire is strikingly clear and consistent, the relic will misfire and bad things will happen to you. Adult minds are complicated and muddy, and thus they will struggle to use the relic. So, as they reason, a child would be the best candidate to fire it up, at least in theory. And yep, you can probably guess what's coming. We see Vueko and Irumyui starving, thirsty, and still very ill, as Irumyui continues to melt and harden. Sure enough, Wazukyan approaches Vueko, or maybe it's the other way around, but I like the former more from a narrative perspective, and offers to let the dying Irumyui use the relic. Oh yeah, that's a face you can trust, for sure. If Belaf is Hitsugaya, then this fucker is definitely Aizen. Vueko's in bad shape, but she says she's not ill. She's simply dying of starvation and thirst, and the scene fades to black as Vueko passes out. Vueko wakes up to see that a bright and cheerful Irumyui is calling her name. What? She looks completely better, but as she reaches for Irumyui, Vueko freezes, seeing that something is terribly wrong, and oh come on! Okay, there's literally no way that I can show you the important stuff here, but Irumyui's arm is still made of melted stone, and she's completely naked, with the Behelit now fused into her chest like a topless jailbaity Mr. Sinister. The worried Vueko and the other sages examine Irumyui and find that she's not only healthy, she has an absurd amount of energy, but something isn't quite right with her now. Belaf remarks that he wonders just what exactly Irumyui wished for. Think back to everything that's happened to this girl, the fact that she also doesn't need to eat or drink now, and you can probably hazard a guess. This relic is really dangerous, especially when you give it to a naive kid who's been horribly traumatized. Get ready folks, because forget dark, this shit is about to get pitch black. Yeah, that relic isn't a wish machine. It's the frigging Jinn from Wishmaster. As time passes, more and more settlers succumb to either the effects of the pseudo-water, the monsters, or simple thirst. In desperation, they send the interference units to get water from the other sources, but find that it's even more toxic than the pseudo-water. One day, Vueko finds Irumyui changed. She now has an adorable, probably slightly familiar, fluffy form that, yep, looks like she's become a blessed hollow like the Nachi, but there's still something very disquieting about her. Vueko remarks that this is the relic making her body the way she wished it to be. Uh-oh. And here we go, right on into the night. One night, the haggard-looking Vueko is woken from sleep by a terrible scream and rushes to Irumyui's side, only to find that, holy frigging crap, Irumyui has given birth to a hideous, malformed blind thing that bears a striking resemblance to her dead pet. Oh, and not birthed in the traditional sense, but more extruded from her body, Geiger style. The baby is basically a stillbirth, as it had no way to take in food. All the thing did was whimper and cry, and despite this, it continued. Irumyui proceeded to constantly give birth to and mourn the deformed, doomed creatures, gradually going insane. Now, let's break this down a bit, because this is both absolutely ingenious and probably one of the most horrifying things I've read anywhere. The relic did actually try and fulfill her desires. Let's go through this together. Irumyui was cast out and abused due to the fact that she couldn't make babies. Down in the abyss, she was constantly hungry and thirsty, and she also had a pet she loved but then died. So, what happened to her? Well, it gave her a body that didn't need to eat or drink. It made her able to have lots of babies, and it also gave her back her pet. However, naturally, a child would have no idea of the actual physical mechanics of childbirth. They might know that a baby comes from your tummy, and that's probably it. And kids probably also don't have the closest or clearest images of their pets. The Behelit fused these three desires together, and absolute shattering horror was the result. As the now dying Vueko mercifully fades away, we see the suffering Irumyui is now doomed to, assumably for eternity, as Vueko's last thoughts are of her and water. Holy crap! Well done, Tsukushi. That is the darkest thing I have ever read. I don't think you'll ever top this one. Wait, please tell me this can't get any darker. Please? Vueko wakes up, with Wazukyan feeding her some sort of broth. It's absolutely delicious, and she feels strength and life flowing back into her. But, wait, where did the broth come from? Oh no. Oh no, no, no. It's exactly what you're thinking. Wazukyan cooked up and served the settlement Irumyui's malformed babies. I think I just threw up my own feet. It turns out that, yeah, that'd be about my reaction too, as we see that Belaf is going quietly insane at this revelation, clawing at his own eyes. That's not just dark, that's emotionally aggressive. Vueko is understandably appalled, but Wazukyan is completely unfazed and tells her to see Irumyui, who has become, what is that thing? A giant amoeba-like monster. The only evidence of its former identity as a small girl is the distorted face barely visible on its surface, and Irumyui continues to give birth to the horrible blind pseudo-rabbit fetuses. To Vueko's horror, she sees that the creature is still loving and caring towards them before Wazukyan yanks them out of her, well, not hands, as she screams incoherently. Vueko begs him to stop, begs him to let Irumyui at least have her babies until they die, but he explains that this isn't possible. Apparently, they're only good to eat when they're fresh, and if this is done, then the ossifying sickness the pseudo-water confers is negated. Remember Ozen? Remember Bondrude? Remember the epic battles and the sense of adventure that these two brought? Yes, cartridges and all. Anyone else starting to miss them? Yeah, me too. Crikey frigging Moses, Takushi. This whole segment, once it gets moving, is just relentless. Anyway, Wazukian asks if she wants to try cooking them herself. He's clearly gone off the deep end too, or maybe he was always like this. And Vueko is cracking up herself, torn between her loyalty to Ganja. Yeah, I could use a bit of Ganja myself right now. And her adoptive daughter. Not sure if she should let things proceed, or if she should try and put Irumyui out of her misery, or just commit suicide. Eventually, she settles on options B and C. But as she's about to get started, the thing that was Irumyui pulls her in close and comforts her. Irumyui is still alive inside this thing somehow, and that makes this all so much worse. In her despair, Vueko resolves to go on living as atonement for her allowing this to happen. Belaf is now completely batshit insane, but is unable to stop eating the broth. It appears that it is somehow physically addictive. He begs Vueko to stop feeding him and just let him starve to death, but she doesn't. We get a wonderfully bleak little interlude, showing that Irumyui's babies are now the size of pigs. She has finally mutated to the extent that she can't scream anymore, and Vueko has realized that, yeah, this is the first time that the hell analog is officially verbalized, but it's hard to see this as anything else. As Takushi confirmed, the Abyss was modeled on hell, and remember, this is only layer 6. I'm both curious to know what layer 7 has in store for us, and I'm almost hoping that we never find out. As their life in hell continues, we learn that part of Irumyui's mutation is the direct fault of Wazukian, who, frankly, is now even more Bond-rude than Bond-rude. Bond-ruder? Yeah. Jokes help. Kind of. He's actually been feeding her additional behelits, which we later learn are called cradles, also sometimes just called eggs. And this results in her growing to leviathan proportions and becoming mobile. The towering creature leads them to the edge of a precipice, overlooking a deep chasm. They watch as Irumyui expands upwards, sprouting branch-like tentacles and devouring the flying monsters of the city as sustenance as she continues to grow. Belaf approaches the Irumyu tree and begs for her to punish him, to put him out of his misery. And sure enough, an aperture opens and he walks in, before being latched onto by the... Hey, that's the sugar thing that does the balancing. Aha. We see that Belaf's body is ripped apart, and then he's changed into the Narehate form we saw before, except that this form is far more beautiful. It's more like an Asian dragon than a centipede, causing everyone watching to marvel. Turns out that this was Wazukian's goal all along. By feeding the behelit into Irumyui, he not only managed to cure the water sickness, he's basically built an organic machine that allows him to transcend humanity. And he beckons everyone else to follow him into the Irumyu tree, declaring that this will be their home. Holy shit, that's mental. Vueko is the only one who refuses, and before anyone can respond, her mind finally shattered, throws herself off the precipice. However, somehow, Wazukian moves like lightning and grabs her, and she realizes that he somehow used the cradle on himself. He's already moved beyond human. She strikes her head on the cliffside and passes out. Vueko awakens in the prison we saw in the previous volume, and Wazukyan, now in his Narehate wraith form, tells her that she's inside Irumyui's head. Now, this bit is so cryptic that I actually don't understand much of it. I still can't figure out why he imprisoned her. But he monologues for a while, and he does seem to imply that the longing the abyss causes in people is a form of homesickness, implying that perhaps all the peoples of the world originally ascended from the abyss. Or maybe homesickness is the wrong word here. I must admit that I haven't read the Japanese version of this, so I'm not sure, as the term sometimes seems to be used synonymously for simple desire, a wish essentially, but again, I don't know. Regardless, drawing on the power of the eggs, cradles, behelets, yeah, I'm as confused as you are on that one. Irumyui continues to grow and expand, and eventually takes the form of the village. Remember when the party first approached Iruburu, and noticed that it was somehow built into an enormous dead creature, nowhere style, and how we learned that the village is sentient? Yep, Iruburu is Irumyui. Once again, keep in mind that I'm guessing a lot of this, as this part is very abstract. But in secret, as some sort of instinct, Irumyui's last conscious act is to take the cradles, somehow fuse them together along with herself, and then causes them to become probably the coolest thing I have ever seen. The last child of Irumyui, a creature born of multiple, near-omnipotent relics and a city-sized hollow, utterly immortal, apocalyptically powerful, and pissed as all hell. Princess of the Hollows, the incarnation of vengeance, Faputa has arrived. To Vueko's dark joy, as the newborn creature emerges, it immediately goes on a rampage, ripping through the interference units and the hollows, an embodiment of Irumyui's fury. In terror, the hollows flee into the newly formed Iruburu, which seems to have developed a protective membrane, which, for some reason, also keeps Faputa out. Panels like this are why Faputa is my absolute favorite thing about this manga. That's just so frigging metal. Again, this character really does somehow encompass everything that this manga is, both adorable and horrifying. Faputa, realizing that she can't breach the membrane, leaves furious, as Vueko remarks that she hopes one day Faputa will come back and kill them all. Not just for the sake of exacting retribution for her mother's fate, but so that she can be free to venture out into the world and live a blessed life of her own, as the last child of Vueko's adoptive daughter. Back in Vueko's prison, yeah, I'm calling it that, and no, I still don't understand why she's in there. We see that she's surrounded by the Shoggoth creature, only it's actually lots of smaller creatures which are implied to be, somehow, the souls of Irumyui's myriad stillborn babies. What? Vueko passes the years naming them and caring for them, as the scene fades to black. Now, before we move on to the present, there's another interesting little reference here. It's almost certainly coincidence, but it's still quite something. Another pretty damn great Western comic, Lucifer, had an arc and character very similar to this. A woman who was cursed by the gods to be both immortal and endlessly miscarry. which eventually resulted in an absurdly powerful killer baby. Again, it's almost certainly a coincidence, but still interesting. I wonder if this is a mythological reference that I'm not aware of. Back in the present, Fueko looks, well, a bit like I'm sure you're feeling after all of that. She explains a bit further. Faputa wants nothing less than the utter genocide of the village in retribution for what they did to her mother. But she can't get in. Riko asks Fueko if she can stop Faputa from destroying the village, but Fueko responds by telling her that, well, A, she doesn't want to, and B, she doesn't think she'd be able to even if she tried. Remember, Faputa is stupidly overpowered. Even Reg was easily overwhelmed by her. Back in the past, we see the newborn Faputa, sort of feral and very fox-like in her behaviors, is startled when she pokes a strange metal lump on the ground, which immediately rises up and starts talking to her. It's one of the interference units she destroyed, only this one was merely damaged. For some reason, Faputa finds it comforting, likely because she views it as a thing rather than a hollow. Man, I just love the design of that. It's so Miyazakian. And aw, just look at Faputa. You so cute, you little murder loaf you. In some genuinely adorable panels, we see the friendship between the two develop, as she helps the robot repair itself and it, in turn, teaches her how to speak. We also see the origins of her insignia. Apparently, it means something irreplaceable, the highest value, the fulfillment of a wish, or the shape of a soul. She asks the robot to give her a name, and it calls her Faputa, which is a combination of noble maiden, i.e. princess, and immortal, hence the immortal princess. Well, that's where that comes from. She in turn names him Gabu-Roon, which means Queen's Guardian, and as the volume draws to a close, shows Faputa having, let's say dreams about Reg. As we see the two making their way to Iruburu together, we know that it's going to be a confrontation the likes of which you cannot even imagine. The stage is set, the pieces are moving into position, and now all that's left to do is see how it all shakes out. Part 6 will be the final installment of the series, at least until the manga wraps up. Let's never do this again. Well, that's me for the day. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, why not stick around? There's plenty more like this, and lots more coming down the pipe. Cheers, my friends, take care, and I'll see you next time. This is the Owl, signing off.